Chapter 3. A New You. How does one throw up if you don't have a mouth or stomach? This was something Jim was pondering as Nate was attempting to flush the toxins from the biogel that kept Jim's brain alive and functional. Instead of a fountain of vomit, all Jim could do was emit a gagging groan through the little speaker crudely attached to the outside of his neural encasement. Ugh, gasped Jim. Don't be a baby, it's almost done. I can't believe you were able to live at all. This liquid is supposed to be clear, not nearly black. It looks like oil coming out of a truck, said Nate. Jim tried to watch the floating screen in front of him to see what Nate was doing, but his virtual eyes kept losing focus and drifting away from the screen. According to Nate, the sensory net was attempting to give him the experience of a fully simulated human body, but it's just that there was no avatar hooked up. Jim could understand what Nate meant, but not really. How could he have eyelids and no face? At least a few times in the last couple of days, Jim had attempted to cross his eyes hard enough so that each eye could look at each other, but try as he might, he still couldn't. Still at this moment, he felt sick from the top of his non-existent head to the bottom of his non-existent toes. Here, maybe this'll help. I found a sleep switch in the sensory net code, said Nate. Jim was shocked to hear that he could be knocked out as easily as somebody turning off a light. He really wanted to protest even the idea of turning his mind on and off. Was he really going to be robbed of the ability to control his own sleep? But with all the nausea, all he could say in protest was, ugh. Nate hit a few keys on the nearby keyboard, and suddenly Jim was fully asleep. It was like being up late at night, watching the TV, and then boom, suddenly you're in a full-blown dream about something else. Instantly, Jim was a robotic mouse strapped to a table. A grinning cat in a doctor's outfit, complete with an old-timey mirror on his head, leaned maliciously over Jim's tiny mouse body. Its fur was orange and striped, with wide green eyes filled with evil joy. Without pause, it leaned down and started to unscrew Mouse Jim's little robotic legs with a small power drill, sort of like what a dentist might have. Jim struggled to break free, but his limbs were well secured with tiny little metal ties. The tiny screws quickly came out, and his legs ceased to move, falling off one by one uselessly by the side of his squirming mouse haunches. Dr. Cat lifted up each metal leg, eyed them closely for a moment, and then put them down carefully on a small towel nearby. The Dr. Cat then leaned in and started unscrewing Mouse Jim's arms. Mouse Jim's little metal hands clenched, and he rocked his shoulders violently in an attempt to escape, but to no avail. Just like his legs, as soon as the tiny screw came out, they went limp beside him. Jim cried out repeatedly for help, but only little robotic-sounding mouse squeaks came out of his mouth. Dr. Cat took each arm in turn and placed them carefully next to the legs. Mouse Jim was now little more than a robotic torso and head, wiggling around helplessly. He was now free from the restraints, but now even more helpless than before. The grinning feline doctor picked up Mouse Jim in its massive clawed fingers. Every moment the cat doctor seemed to grow bigger in size. It plucked up Mouse Jim and put him into a transparent orange hamster ball. Dr. Cat then put the ball back on the table and started to bat the imprisoned, limbless rodent around. With each massive impact of the huge cat doctor's paws, he was sent flying around inside his plastic prison. Whenever the ball stopped for a moment, Mouse Jim tried to make the ball move away from the cat, but his little chin couldn't make the ball budge. Even his most intense pelvic gyrations failed to elicit any movement. He just rolled back and forth inside the ball, squeaking in terror as the grinning monstrous cat had its fun. After nearly a dozen swipes, the cat doctor stopped and leaned in on Mouse Jim inside his round prison. Dr. Cat looked him in the eyes, each of which appeared to be as large as dinner plates, as the cat doctor was nearly 30 feet tall at this point. It licked its lips maliciously. The cat doctor then popped open the ball and gripped Mouse Jim's tail between its two massive claws. Slowly it lifted Mouse Jim out of the half of a hamster ball, dangling by his tail, and lifted him high above its hideous head. The cat doctor then opened its mouth like a foot-pedal trash can, splitting the grinning face open into two halves, of row after row of hundreds of shark-like teeth and a cavernous ringed throat. Mouse Jim struggled vainly against his inevitable end, swaying back and forth by his little metal tail. He cried out in terror, but all that came back was robotic squeaks. And then came the inevitable moment when the cat doctor dropped Mouse Jim into its massive void-like mouth, now so cavernous it could swallow a house. At the moment his fall started, Jim was overwhelmed with the irony of it all. Every step towards freedom had made Mouse Jim's fate more fixed. He had lost his restraints only by losing his limbs. He had been released from the ball only to dangle by his tail, and now he was free from the cat doctor's grip entirely, just to plunge into its cavernous gullet. Did he ever really have any freedom at all, or was it always inevitable? Mouse Jim fell into the darkness, squeaking all the way down its infinitely long and dark throat. And poof! Jim was awake. There was no grogginess or gentle change from the state of sleep to the state of wake. It was as if an elephant-sized mass of reality had just sat on a grape of his dream. The dream world had imploded in an instant, and suddenly Jim was so awake it was as if he never slept at all. "What just happened?" said Jim. Instantly surprised, he didn't squeak. On his screen, Jim could see what was now twilight outside, despite being near morning just moments before. "Hey, he's back," said Nate, now with a totally different shirt, although no less stained or dirty than the old one. "Sorry, I forgot to turn you back on. I mean, wake you up. I'm not a TV set. Don't just knock me out whenever you like, Nate," said Jim as the memory of his nightmare faded away into the current nightmare of his existence. Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you have any dreams?" "I made some other fixes over the last few days," started Nate. But then Jim cut him off. "What do you mean, days?" demanded Jim. "Yeah, it's been about 3 days. Sorry, but I think you're going to like what I have." "You'll thank me," said Nate with a big grin. "What could you possibly have that would justify?" started Jim. But Nate was already typing away on the keyboard, someplace nearby that Jim couldn't see from the camera's small perspective. Jim decided to drop the subject. The last thing he needed to do was to make an enemy of the only friend he had in the world. Jim waited in silence for a moment, with only the sound of the keyboard and a static view of the warehouse wall in front of him. Suddenly, inside the black void of his virtual space, a floor appeared. It shot outward and away from Jim in all directions, and then downward at the edges, as if he was on top of a wide hill. The floor was made of glowing white wires forming triangles, which united to form squares. These burning white wires revealed a swaying web in the distance, which seemed to toss and turn like water. "Wait a second, I think I'm over the buffer limit of the RAM module. Let me unplug it and reboot the environment," said Nate. No, don't turn it off, it's amazing. "I have a world in here again," said Jim in shock. It was amazing to see something besides a view screen. It was so much more than anything he had since the fire. The endless darkness was finally beat back by this glowing wire landscape. It would have been breathtaking, if Jim had lungs to breathe. "Just relax," said Nate, and suddenly the wire world around Jim blinked out of existence. Again he floated in a featureless void, with just the screen to keep him company. Jim felt panic at the wire world's sudden loss. Having seen something besides darkness, even for a moment, made the black void so much more unbearable. "I'm relaxed. It's all okay. Nate knows what he's doing," muttered Jim as Nate, somewhere out of the view of the camera, continued to type on the keyboard and clatter around Jim's case. Jim stared at a crack in the cement wall of the warehouse, trying to guess what celebrity it looked like. As he had no control over the camera, this was the only game Jim was getting good at. Maybe Georgette from the movie Flight of Love? Maybe he should ask Nate for a TV feed. Did TV stations still exist? It must have been 3 decades since he last watched a TV channel. Finally, Nate popped back into view with a big smile on his face, clearly proud of whatever it was he'd been doing. "Wait until you see this, old man." Then he lifted up his keyboard dramatically, which was apparently wireless, and hit a single key. Again, the world around Jim exploded into view, only this time it wasn't just glowing white wires. No, instead, sand swept out under him and plunged down into the soft rolling waves that shot off into the distance on all sides. Overhead, blue skies popped into view in big square chunks like tiles. Those tiles filled the sky above Jim, and then rolling white clouds emerged, and in popped a bright yellow sun. Although its light was already apparent before its arrival, Jim's floating screen was now hovering over the surface of a small island. Jim looked upwards at the bright sun, which actually felt warm, and realized he had a hand. Sort of. It was roughly the right pinkish skin tone, but awkwardly blocky. He looked at his fingers, each more of a squarish tube than anything remotely human. But his blocky hands did block the sunlight. He looked down, and a similarly squarish body met his view. He appeared to be wearing a very square and pixelated flower shirt and shorts. His square legs pushed into the sand. Jim kicked at the sand, and while it deformed and flew out like the real thing, he didn't feel the impact or any sense of standing in it. Give me a moment to complete the world render. It should switch to a higher res AVI after the environmental load," said Nate. "Even this blocky thing is pretty amazing. And look at the sand and the water. Oh my god, the water. I haven't seen water like this since a fire," said Jim. Jim ran the 20 feet it took to reach the water's edge and leapt into the water with both feet like a kid. The water splashed and rippled with all the realism of a AAA simulation. This wasn't just a virtual room, but a really high-quality one. Maybe the old world Jim remembered wasn't completely lost after all. One by one, items started to appear on Jim's pristine beach. First a simple beach ball, then a wooden reclining chair. Out of the ground popped a large palm tree, and then another. Between the two, white ropes then ensnared the trees and tied themselves together repeatedly, eventually forming a hammock. A cooler appeared near the hammock, and inside bottles popped out. Jim dashed over to the bottles only to trip over a large brown mass and land face first into the sand. Lacking any sense of touch, the fall failed to have any impact on Jim. He didn't even have lips or mouth to get full of sand. Jim stood up and attempted to wipe the sand off, but the sand didn't stick to his blocky, plastic-like body. Jim looked down to see a large sea turtle looking back at him with vague disinterest. Then it began to slowly move back towards the ocean. "Oh my God, it's a turtle," said Jim. He forgot all about the bottles of beer or soda or whatever it was in the cooler. They really didn't seem to matter, as his plastic body probably couldn't drink them anyways. Instead, Jim bounded over to the turtle and jumped on top of its shell. The beast seemed unfazed by his presence and continued to move towards the ocean, one slow flipper step after another. Nate's voice cut in. "You'll find a few NPC creatures in this program. Don't go swimming out too far, as one of them is a shark designed to reset your Abby by eating it. And I don't know if there's code in here to give you your body back, so that could get really bad." Jim didn't hear what Nate said, though. He sat down Indian style on top of the turtle's back. Or was it a tortoise? Jim wasn't too sure what the correct terminology was. It was certainly big. It was at least 5 feet across. He was pretty sure they were reptiles. Not that it mattered, this one wasn't a living creature, but an animated prop. And it was amazing. Everything was amazing. After years of darkness and nothingness, he was somewhere. That unyielding limbo was gone, and he was at last standing on ground. Even if his body lacked any sensations besides warmth, he still had a body. "Wait a second, did you say shark?" said Jim. "The world's loaded," said Nate. "Now, look at your hands." Jim looked down at his blocky hands to see every square edge break into two and drift apart equally. His fingers went from having 4 sides to 8 sides to 16. Again and again more edges appeared, from hundreds to thousands to millions. Soon there was enough detail for creases to appear, and then fingerprints. Jim looked down at his body was already in process of doing the same. Even the shirt, which originally hung off him like a cardboard box, subdivided and smoothed out until it was actually stitched cloth that swayed in the breeze. And finally, when the edges reached such a degree that they were no longer visible in the least, Jim finally felt the turtle beneath him. "I can feel, Nate! I can feel!" said Jim in excitement. He jumped off the turtle, or tortoise, or whatever it was, and ran over to the cooler. Inside the cooler were bottles of something called New You brand soda, sitting in ice. Jim unscrewed the metal cap, threw back a hard swing of the strange soda, and then, as if to demonstrate the full extent of the simulator's physics engine, gagged and spit the entire mouthful all over the beach in front of him. "Oh God, what the hell is this?" said Jim, as he spat out the remains of the foul drink. "It tastes like salami or something." The distinct flavor of meat was followed by an aftertaste of asparagus. "I didn't get all the code restored, so there's going to be some glitches in the simulation," said Nate with a small chuckle. "Can you see in here?" asked Jim, noticing that Nate must have seen him spit out the terrible soda if he laughed. "I have a small screen installed that shows me the inside," said Nate. "It's linked to a virtual camera inside the simulator so I can see your world." "Okay," said Jim, realizing that having a body also meant he can now be seen. This could present some privacy problems. "Nate, can you make the camera visible?" "I guess, but why?" asked Nate. He started to type something on the keyboard. There was a little hum sound near Jim, and he turned to almost smack face first into a floating, cartoonishly designed camera. Jim stepped back and waved at the camera. "So, how do I turn that off?"